I'm Ashley Wagasback, feeding therapist, occupational therapist, and lactation consultant. Look forward to discussing all things feeding so that we can support you to bring your little one to their maximum potential so that feeding can be enjoyable for the entire family. Are you looking for a community of other moms joining together to support their little one through the ups and downs of feeding and gross motor milestones? The Thriving Together community is just for you. Find us on social media at Instagram, Facebook, and www.sensorysolutionsTherapy.com to learn more. We look forward to seeing you. Good day. Welcome back to another episode of the Feeding Solutions Podcast. I am thrilled to have with me again Michelle Emanuel. She is an occupational therapist, IBCLC, and 1,000 other things that have lots of long letters. But again, I'm bringing her back on because she has so much to share. She is so grounded in this whole person approach, supporting mom and baby who are dealing with feeding struggles and beyond that. And so we're going to take some time in this conversation just to dive deeper, kind of talk about things that are practical, things that often are overlooked, things that are confusing in this world of infant feeding, and just really trying to help families understand what good holistic care looks like for their baby and the mom in this feeding journey. So again, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm honored to be here.
Absolutely love it. Okay, so one of the things that I would like to get more clarity for myself and for listeners, this term body work when it comes to infants. So explain to me from your world what that means. What does that look like?
Okay, body work is really kind of a colloquial term, and it's used to talk about a lot of different things. So I just want you to know that I'm not an expert in all modalities of body work. I have trained in many. There's another word we can use for body work, which is manual therapy. So it's the application of our hands and loads and forces and ways we move the body. And it's for many different things. It can be to address alignment. It can be to address a localized area, pain, um, a problem we have. And it can be done anywhere from newborn all the way through the lifespan. So what body work or manual therapy addresses is different based on our age and where we're at, what period of our life. So for babies in feeding, that has meant modalities like craniosacral therapy and myofascial release and acupressure and any other kind of somatic form of body work. And so those are different brands, so to speak, of body work and different, a little bit, a lot of it has commonality because the body is the same, but a lot of it is focused on tissues and fascia and fluids and that type of thing and management in the body. So it's input coming from the outside to work with the body and really helpful, way to address the body.
So therapy is a very broad term. There's a bunch of different people who are doing manual therapy and working with infants who are having feeding struggles. So, like, what would you define the word therapy as far as like in the context of babies with feeding oral challenges?
Well, that's where a little bit the distinction starts to come up because when we talk about therapy, usually that is therapy to address functional deficits
Mm-hmm.
and to address neurodevelopmental maturational milestones and needs that babies have. And that's a little different, although in therapy, you can use manual therapy techniques. So this is why it's a little bit confusing because everything is
Mm-hmm.
everything. But when we think about therapy, it's more about eliciting or facilitating function.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at a baby who's 8 weeks old and they're supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z for anti-gravity movements or, what they're doing with their head and neck or their face, their hands, and then you work on the functional gains.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I just took a craniosacral course a couple of weeks ago, and I've learned that it's pretty open-ended as far as like who can provide craniosacral. So I think that also can make it a little confusing for families who are just trying to figure out like who in my community is available to me, but like the types of professionals that you feel are trained to do hands-on support. Like, again, we're not trying to isolate, exclude, but again, we're just trying to bridge any gaps, misinformation, and make sure families are getting high quality care. So, what would you say to that as far as the type of the professionals that are trained to do this kind of hands-on work?
Yeah, ideally, it's somebody who has a license to touch, and that
Mm-hmm.
is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
an OT, a PT, chiropractor, doctors and osteopaths, licensed massage therapists. There's a lot of licensed massage therapists doing craniosacral therapy work, which is good. And there are a couple of states that don't require licensure for certain types of therapy modalities. But in the vested interest of a vulnerable population of babies and parents, it's best to go with licensed professionals who have experience and education in what we call scope of practice. So like what our roles are. Even
Mm-hmm.
between like an occupational therapist and a physical therapist, even though there's a lot of overlap and a lot of commingling, there are different scopes of practice that we would even all agree on
Mm-hmm.
between speech as well. So, for me, when we're talking about therapy, it's going to be usually in feeding, usually traditionally, and just, the amounts of people who are trained and have expertise, it's occupational therapy or speech therapy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are some physical therapists who are getting more and more into feeding. And so that is also another profession, although there are many less.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center for 17 and a half years, and PTs didn't do feeding at all. As a matter of fact, they would have laughed that off. But now it's just a little bit more, I think lactation is becoming more and more something we're
Mm-hmm.
all wanting to promote and support. And so I think
Right. Yeah.
regardless of some of our therapy backgrounds, we want that piece of it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's bottle feeding too, but really looking at a lot of the feed, I think the feeding for OTPT and speech is being driven by breastfeeding, which is fantastic. And, working collaboratively with IBCLCs, et cetera. But as far as like, body work, that's usually a very highly experienced chiropractor or an
Mm-hmm.
osteopath or even
Mm-hmm.
LMT who's been working with the baby and they're doing like, if they're doing myofascial release, craniosacral therapy. Now, for me, if you ask what's the primary need that babies have, and we're talking about babies newborn to pre-crawling, the overarching drive is to work on function because
Mm-hmm.
their developmental milestones increase very quickly. Their growth is very rapid, and there's a lot of things that we're building the foundation. And so we want to not overlook that
Mm-hmm.
piece of it. And a lot of times the functional deficits aren't just because of fascial restrictions, it's because of the sensory processing aspect of it and how our reflexes are working and how our movement patterns are being driven or not.
Absolutely. Well, we kind of jumped into the conversation really, really quickly regarding like this whole body um, glance, and then we kind of jumped back into the feeding and how the we speak as though we just assume that those are very connected, but I think that can be confusing. I have parents that kind of look at me like, I'm here for you to help me feed through these, these babies to feed better. And I'm talking about the entire body. So do you want to kind of talk a bit about like what's happening inside the baby's body and why we can't just start cutting the baby into pieces and we really have to look at the whole thing?
Yeah, and that's a great conversation, and we'll talk about it
Mm-hmm.
specifically for babies, but it's true for all of us that what happens in our
Mm-hmm.
mouth is affecting us all the way down to our toes and all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we look at what is the function of the tongue, it's a multimuscular midline organ, and it's responsible for our feeding. It's responsible for our communication. It's responsible for even our sensory processing, how our tongue is moving around, how it
Mm-hmm.
contacts all of the structures, how we can pay attention to what's in our mouth and stabilize and work on that for feeding and other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we also talk about tongue posture a lot as it relates to looking at myofunctional therapy. And that's another adjunct for looking at this area is specifically muscles and function that we're working on just for the mouth. And that is that it's also important for our upper airway patency. And so that means that how open our airways feel and how easily our body is breathing. So anytime anything's affecting our breathing, it's going to affect our whole body. It's going to affect our
Mm-hmm.
nervous system, our mood. And so for babies, that it's very unique even when compared to other people because we are, as babies, developing head control.
Right.
And a lot of the head control is going to come from either whether our tongue is up on our palate and having good posture or it's not. And we're developing our posture in general. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very important for babies to see how the tongue is sort of driving the bus and leading the way. And sometimes I refer to the tongue as the epicenter of development. And babies in general are just very oral centric. They're very focused around their mouth. They're very
Mm-hmm.
oriented, all their reflexes, and the most sophistication is in the mouth. And so if the mouth isn't working the way it's designed to do, or it's supposed to do, or the demands of the task, then the body will compensate. And that's why another reason why we have to pay attention to the body, not that the body supports the mouth and the mouth drives the body, but that the body compensates around it and will use different patterns of moving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times what that ends up looking like for babies is a head turning preference to one side, even head molding or flattening, a lateral C curve through the
Mm-hmm.
spine,
Mm-hmm.
legs and feet and ankles that are crossed over all the time.
Yes, yes. It's very common. I think that it's very hard to see the dysfunction. I would just say just the dysfunction when you see it on repeat so often. And so okay, we can't get through this conversation without talking a bit about tongue ties. And I think that that's when families are really seeking that additional support because obviously, if you're struggling, there's a high likelihood maybe there's a tongue, lip tie, tether oral tissue, some shape or form. And what I see, and I get overwhelmed, like even when I'm on social media and seeing parents say, I'm seeing this professional and we did or we didn't do this support before after. And I feel like that just kind of explodes into this very big confused mess for families. So again, resources are vast and vary from parts of the country and in the world. But if we can shoot for ideal for babies pre-post frenectomy tongue tie release, and the providers that would push the bus in the direction that we want to go in, like what would you say would be ideal?
Well, it's a good question. An ideal is going to matter based on what deficits are
Yes.
present, right? So
Yes. Mm-hmm.
that's going to matter. So I would say that the level of functional deficits, and I like to look at things in five basic categories when it comes to tongue tie: posture, oral, airway, facial, and functional. And functional is all of the stuff like reflux, distended abdomen, gassiness, difficulty burping, excessive hiccups, like all of the things that are going on,
Hmm.
with the baby. And so I'm looking at all of that and saying like what would be ideal is based on how much functional deficit there are. Because
Mm-hmm.
before a tongue tie release, there's always, a little bit of improvement that needs to happen. Now, the milder the symptoms are, the less improvements we need to make. But so we're really only talking about the babies who have more moderate to significant symptoms
Mm-hmm.
with this. And so ideally for them, we would have a period of where we do an assessment and the lactation and feeding needs have to be met in the background. We might be working in therapy to improve them, but we also need bridges, we need help, we need support. So that's where we work collaboratively and make sure we're not letting anybody wait for a release or anything like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like actively preparing, but they would get therapy to be able to improve their symptoms a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and prepare also for wound care, which is a very intense period after the release that happens for several weeks. and can be an uncomfortable sensation for the baby. So preparing for that really helps to build the resiliency in the nervous system. And
Hmm.
then making sure that the baby is doing better and, muscle tone and strength and range of motion with everything, and then do the release and then do therapy after. And
Hmm.
not just focusing on the fascia or the body parts, but the integrated whole function. And for babies, that's posture, how they're doing with tummy time and side lying, and depending upon their age, sitting up, how they're able to organize around midline or not, whether they're even able to receive calming when they get upset. Like that's part of how, babies are interacting with their environment. So, and then the more significant the symptoms, the more therapy we need to do. And also to make sure we're doing the right therapy and seeing changes. For me,
Hmm.
that's the biggest thing, like asking myself all the time. Like I can think I'd like to do this 2 sessions and that, but to actually see what changes are happening and
Hmm.
notice how the baby is responding. And, you know, what are the needs that need to be met there, even before or after release.
Absolutely. Well, so let's talk a bit more. So, um, for the parent who so and so and so and so said there was no oral restriction, but those functional things that you rattled off, that's their reality. So
Right.
that you would say to that family, yes, you are not making a mountain out of a molehill. This isn't just something you have to grind white knuckle through. There is support for your baby. I have parents who doubt themselves as a mama, who maybe I shouldn't be breastfeeding, maybe I should never have become a mom because they've been told that the concerns that they are living are just like, oh, we just have to give baby time to grow out of that. And it's heartbreaking to see that. So, would you say that that would be a reason, those functional things as gas and difficulty burping, abdominal distension would be a reason to warrant some therapeutic intervention?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
No doubt. And I get it. I understand that pediatricians understand that these
Hmm.
aren't huge medical
Sure,
factors
sure.
and they don't need to make a more elevated referral, but they could make a parallel referral or a therapy referral,
Hmm. Hmm.
which over the time we know as therapists has been big and small. There's been
Yes.
times when there's lots of referrals and there's times when they're trying to, it feels like, limit resources sometimes. But
Hmm.
um, it's a little bit of a newer thing for the pediatricians with the tongue tie because most of these babies are not typically, they're saying, oh, okay, well, I wouldn't ever refer them to anyone, but they're having all of these feeding problems, but they don't
Yeah.
have a diagnosis. They don't have a risk factor like they weren't in a NICU or some are. But, if let's say they don't, and so they assume they're typically developing because some of the nuances of development aren't being seen in their office for very short periods of time, and or the symptoms get brushed off, especially the abdominal wall or the breathing
Hmm. Hmm.
and the squeaky breathing or the clicking with the latch that will often get put away. And so parents have to advocate for themselves. So that's one good thing I think about social media is that parents are like, oh wait, there is somebody out there, I just need to find them.
Yeah.
I hope we
Agree.
don't spend a lot of time on social media because there's a lot of self-proclaimed experts, and at this point it looks like a lot of opinion rather than what
Hmm.
really true. But letting us know that hey, there are resources out there and you can find them, because when we do implement therapeutic strategies, and therapy is about neuromuscular reeducation, about eliciting functional movements. It's
Hmm.
about reflexes and postural development and the way that we have soft and hardwired programs that are driving our babies, but we see they're being stuck in certain areas, especially, as it relates to the mouth. So I wish that the referral would be made a little bit
Hmm.
quicker because
Agree.
we can really implement more, so even the suck, swallow, breathe coordination. It's
Hmm.
really good to get it as early as possible. We can still work on it later, but the earlier, we get it, the better. And so parents have to really advocate for themselves. And I am
Hmm.
in private practice and I do. a lot of cash-based work. I'm not really into the insurance. Some of the therapy, private practice are, but I will sometimes, do a super bill for my,
Hmm.
clientele so they can get maybe some reimbursement. But they've had to do all of this on their own, but they're so glad they did, right? At the end of the day.
And it's really not, it's that extensive amount of time. When you start seeing the progress, that's what's so exciting. I
Yes.
understand it's time and resources, your finances, and not to undermine that could be a huge sacrifice. But I also, it's so exciting when you just start seeing the baby start making great progress and everyone's nervous system and everyone's sleeping better. And it's like,
Yes.
okay, like I know this probably took quite an ordeal to get you to this point, but look at the payoff here. So that's what's so exciting about this.
All right. And it's especially for parents, because babies, they're growing so fast in this pre-crawling period that we hit a lot of advancements and also regression. So things seem to go up and down, up
Hmm.
and down, up and down. And
Hmm.
one of the things we do see with babies that have oral dysfunction and restrictions is that their regression sometimes look more impressive and their advancements sometimes look a little bit less impressive. So it's really good to work on all of these aspects and making sure that nothing's compounding, because what happens is then we get to 6 months and the baby hardly has head control and they can't sit and their feeding hasn't improved. And we wonder, can we start solids? And they're all those are like
Hmm.
the criteria for even wanting to start solids. So it's this period before where we're building the foundation for all of this. And what we do is important, and mother's comfort is important, and baby's good feeding skills do matter for how
Hmm.
the brain continues to map feeding and map oral
Hmm.
function.
Hmm. Absolutely. Do you believe that a team of providers is beneficial for this work?
Yeah, and every team's
Hmm.
going to look a little different based on the
Hmm.
baby's needs and the family's needs and
Hmm.
what's available in the
Hmm.
community.
Yeah.
Now, many people, even if they don't have someone like you or I in their community, we do telehealth.
Hmm.
And that can be, especially with someone with a lot of experience, a very valuable
Hmm.
way to continue even being a part of the team. But the team needs to meet the baby's needs. So there needs to be,
Yeah.
we're big on feeding and sleep and movement, no, neural
Hmm.
developmental maturation. Those are
Hmm.
three,
Hmm.
and really being calm and organized. Maybe those would be the top four. And, babies that have, like, they're not as calm or they're dysregulated, a lot of times that's overlapping with GI symptoms.
Hmm.
And therapy helps GI symptoms, right? That's what's one of the things. You're
Yes.
like, how can that be? But it helps to balance the core and the neuromuscular support and even stimulate autonomic regulation. It helps the nerves work better.
Hmm.
So a lot of our babies will also have trouble going to the bathroom, going not enough or too much or having lots of gas. And having abdominal distension and feeling uncomfortable in your tummy will affect your development too.
Absolutely. Hmm. Very true. And
Hmm.
I think that's important for families to see that that is, I tell parents all the time, like if your baby is so gassy, refluxy, their wake windows, you're having to do the three ring circus to keep them organized, then how are they going to want to stop, socially engage, explore
Yeah.
their environment? And so at what point is this going to end up have an impact on their development? You might not be seeing it quite yet because they're only 6 weeks old, but very shortly, it's going to be one of those things that's going to impact how
Hmm.
they're moving and wanting to explore their environment. So we talked about the baby and the benefit of post frenectomy support therapy. Um, I see quite often, on Facebook groups and other social media pages that families said, I did XYZ before, my baby is still struggling and we are post release. And again, I feel like even just the release in and of itself there can be a huge variation in like the quality of the release and blah, 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 it goes on and on. So But like, what would you say to the family who's continuing to have struggles even after they've had a tongue tie release?
This is where I would get into some therapy, neuromuscular
Mm-hmm.
therapy. This is where I would
Mm-hmm.
find an OT, PT, or speech to work because it's a different approach, eliciting motor patterns and working with the neuromuscular function. And that
Mm-hmm.
is where a lot of babies get caught up. If we only take a bodywork or manual therapy approach, which it's very has a lot of efficacy to get our hands on and get the new tissue changes, but in order to get through the door, in order to keep making changes through development, we have to work with the neural patterns and the neural circuits. And that's a little bit of a difference too when we're working on therapy. We're working on actually trying to get the brain to pattern differently and to respond differently in the moment. So I would say do that. That would be the number one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the family came and they weren't sure what was going on and they'd gotten a release and they said, hey, nothing changed. My initial thought would be, we probably didn't do optimal timing of release. We probably didn't really look at the functional deficits and we really didn't time the release based on not only the baby's nervous system regulation, but how well prepared their tissues were
Mm-hmm.
for release. And so there's many different ways to look at it, but regardless, we would want to get into therapy, and that is a time to connect with someone who's working on function and gross
Mm-hmm.
and fine motor skills, and even social engagement, social, emotional, interactional skills are developmental milestones. They are, we're supposed to be really working with that. And also oral motor feeding. It's about not just gaining weight and getting enough milk in, but
Right.
how do we do that? And
Uh-huh.
we know that babies have sucking reflex, but we also know that integrates around 12 weeks. So baby has to learn very quickly how to do volitional movement patterns of their tongue, meaning they don't have to rely and they can't rely on these reflexes. They have to do it on their own, and that takes a lot of brain power. So that's my immediate thought when we say function is hasn't changed or they're the same as they were, is that we have to really get down and deep, work in the neuromuscular aspects of it, work on movement and the neural
Mm-hmm.
programs.
Yes, yes. And again, I think that reiterating to families when I'm talking with them and maybe they're not someone that I'm seeing, but they're questioning like, why has this not worked? And laying it out so that they understand how much the function and the prep work prior and how again like there is a need for different viewpoints or your team, each person plays a valuable part and how all of those people are going to support the baby moving in the right direction. So that brings me to the next point. It's like, oh, but like I have to take another leap of faith and bring a new provider on, or we're encouraging a mom to maybe see an additional provider and they're overwhelmed. And like, how would you communicate to them the importance of, okay, yes, I see that your things are already overwhelming for you, but I'm recommending that you bring a therapist on board to support your child. What would you speak into that person?
Yeah, I think I would speak directly to what we're trying to change or what we're
Mm-hmm.
noticing and how
Mm-hmm.
therapy could directly
Mm-hmm.
help with that. And then I also think I would look at the total program of what they're doing, what exercises, what have they been recommended, and who are they seeing, and see, can we back off of one, not pull
Mm-hmm.
away, but back off of one to step the pedal on, and then we can
Yes, I love
intersperse it.
that.
And, just really everybody paying attention to the changes.
Mm-hmm.
Not just saying we're doing this, we're doing that, but what's the response? How's the baby, really responding? And we do sometimes pull back and sometimes push forward with a certain therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always
I
asking
love that.
myself too, what does the baby need so much right now? And, uh,
Mm-hmm.
basing it on that. And it's also going to have to do with resources again, but, you know, I would say even taking advantage of, telehealth as part of our collaboration as well. That's part of the
Mm-hmm.
team.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about the doctors and even dentists and ENTs that are doing some of the procedures, they're definitely a part of the team, but they're not trained in the assessment of function. They're not
Right.
trained in how to even really do that part of it. So I think too that when families are experiencing teamwork and they're getting a benefit, then when they talk to their professionals and tell them what they're seeing with their own baby, that can really help um, everybody learn a little bit more about what's going on because
Mm-hmm.
I s- we the whole concept of teamwork makes the dream work, and it's true. And being surrounded by your village is what
Mm-hmm.
supports us. Now we don't
Absolutely.
need 10 people in our village, but we need, you know, one,
The right
two,
people.
yeah, the right people to meet the needs of what's going on with your little one right now at this
Yeah.
time. And even ourselves, we need attention as well. We need, as parents, we need to have our needs addressed. And sometimes we need some therapy, or we need some
Mm-hmm.
body work. I know, just definitely for me, it was more mental support when my kids were little
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
being heard and uh, having a place to have an outlet that wasn't the kids that sort of resolved some of
Right.
that. Especially if you're working with tongue ties and the whole body issues that go along with that. It's a lot. And I would also say too, is to hunker down and, listen to one or two trusted people instead of trying
Right.
to get so many opinions because it makes it more confusing.
Mm-hmm. For
And notice
sure.
what's happening for your baby right in front of you.
For sure. So I know this is a topic that you live, breathe, and sleep. Is there anything on that you feel like you wanted to really communicate to listeners about this particular topic of body work and the manual therapy and the collaborative care?
One, I think that if we're getting ready for release, that doing body work is not a functional assessment for readiness for release.
Mm,
And we really want to look at the functional gains, like what is the tongue doing in the jaw and what's supposed to be happening with the latch and what's supposed to be happening with posture and midline organization and gross and
mm-hmm,
fine motor movements and what are babies supposed to be doing. That kind of tells us a little bit more. So we need to involve, I think, a little bit more looking at the functional differences and postural uh, as it relates to development.
mm-hmm.
That's one thing. And another thing is, just not being afraid to reach out to people in your community, referral sources, people that this is for professionals a lot too. Reach out and talk to one another in your community and let everybody know what we're doing. Um,
Yes. Well, and that I wanted to speak into that, what we're doing. So what it has been life-giving for me is just um, being a student of yours. And so there's another part of your mission, and it is training up therapists to do this work. There is an abundance of babies out there, and there are not enough of us. So what does that look like? What does that piece look like?
Woo, I wish I knew a little bit more clearly, but I've been teaching for a long time and I've been in the tongue tie field a long time since the beginning of time. But and I've educated a lot of people. Even, I used to go and do the 3-day cranial nerve dysfunction class, and that was multidisciplinary, probably one of the most fun times I've had, where it was everybody on the tongue tie team, and it would be everyone from the beginning to the end, and everybody understood it. Like, if you look at a big team, that's like 8 people. Now every baby's going to be seeing 8 people, right? So,
Right.
um, well, where was I going with that? I got so excited about that.
Yeah,
Just to
no,
have
just
teach
like
professionals. And then it became apparent and that was really before occupational therapists and speech therapists and especially physical therapists, they were a little bit hesitant. They were on the edge and the fringe of tongue tie. That's really happened in the last 4 to 5 years that therapies really come out into this world, which is really great. So now I've kind of niched down, and where I focus a lot on is OT speech and PT, like getting everybody ready to know how to take care of pre and post frenectomy in the best way possible, and also to calculate optimal timing of release, which I have a standardized approach for that. And um, just helping us understand how we all work best together and what really matters for babies, and what
mm-hmm.
helping. And not because I'm big on people hear me say, don't waste their time, don't waste their money, don't waste any of their resources.
Mm-hmm.
Want to do the most impactful, most impressive, important thing, um, and individualize it as well. I've developed a couple of programs that are kind of like, in a sense, a way, an approach to do something. But when you apply it to a human being, you individualize it
Mm-hmm.
and make it work for what they need it to do. And also really focusing on the parents' goals. Sometimes we get caught up in our own goals and what we want to do, but what's the parents' goal? What do they want to do and how do they see their baby and how can we help them see their baby um, even better in a way that helps them with,
Right.
oh,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Breathe life back in to something that has kind of gone amiss when there's lots of fussing and crying and sleeplessness happening.
right.
So it's so fun to see how quickly these little ones start shifting whenever you are doing, like you said, the work that is very individualized and is what that specific baby and family need. And so, yeah, I'm grateful to have this opportunity to talk with you just
Yeah.
to,
Let me think of one more thing to say. And I think sometimes what happens with kids is that we notice things a lot later when we think, oh, well, their posture or their
Mhm.
behavior, or they can't chew, or they're still drooling, and they're a toddler, and they're a preschooler, and they're a kindergartner. That was all present when they were a baby. And that's why
Sure.
many of us have taken our microscope and focused on this very early times because we can see those orange flags that are really red flags, and there is
Yeah.
a lot we can do for foundational development and neuroplasticity and the way babies regulate their nervous system and develop um, to have an impact here. And that,
Yes.
we see it later, but if you are seeing anything in your kids, it was there early on. And I think a lot of us, that's how we got here, like even with our
I
own
agree.
kids. And when we know better, we do better. I think we're in the process of that. And you're a big part of that. I want to say thank you for doing this podcast. This is really great because
No,
this is what's
absolutely.
helping
Hmm.
get the information out and help people understand and find community
Hmm.
and feel confident in what they're doing because it's not always what maybe is being recommended by other medical providers or not understood, not well understood as well.
Yes, for sure. It's still, I feel like there's a bit of trailblazing happening. You know, I kind of wake up, do my work, go to sleep, wake up, do my work. So I feel like this is something that I've been doing and I've been able to really fine tune this skill. But then when you kind of look up at around and you start talking to people, you're like, oh my goodness, like we still have so far to go.
So
And
much to
so,
do. But
yes.
look at how far we've come.
No, yes.
And I just want to, one more plea with parents is spend less time on social media and that it's really, it's become very, it's helpful to a certain extent, but it's driving anxiety levels really sky high.
Hmm.
And we're doing a lot of watching and not a lot of doing.
Hmm.
And so, it's information, not wisdom. And it's something to trigger us to talk to our community about and learn about as it relates to our own kid. But just a little,
Hopefully, it empowers them to act and to find the person that can
right,
help them versus like a blanket. Like I learned this on TikTok, and so I'm going to just try it. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, this must not be what my baby needs, and then they
right.
give up and lose
Well,
hope.
right. And one of the great examples of that is the guppy, which, one of our
Hmm.
really old tummy time method techniques. And that a lot of people do it because it's very popular and trendy. And it is a wonderful technique, but it's not the therapeutic thing for every baby.
Hmm.
It's not the thing that you need. And, you have a baby that extends their head a lot, they need a balance with flexion. And so hanging out in guppy is not really changing their therapeutic milieu. It's still helpful, it's not hurtful, but we want to really
Right.
focus on things that the baby needs to help them in the moment, what they need. And so even a really fantastic technique like that is
Hmm.
not always going to be the change agent for a baby.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense for
Hmm.
sure, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. So connect, and Michelle's a great person who, if you feel like you want to have someone who you can trust and knows the country and people everywhere, you do such a great job of who's in so and so, who's in so and so part of the country. And so, again, you could access her through all of her social media, and we'll have that information included in this podcast as well in the notes. So, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Enjoyed absolutely every minute, and hopefully, it was valuable as it is to me. So, we will definitely talk soon.
Thank you.
I hope you found this episode on the feeding solutions helpful. If you would like more information, please follow Sensory Solutions on Facebook or Instagram, or you can always visit our website at www.sensorysolutionsTherapy.com. Thanks so much for joining today, and look forward to seeing you next time.